Welcome to Global Watch. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. Good evening. Tonight, the eyes of the nation are fixed on the Supreme Court, where a landmark decision has just been handed down, one that will shape the future of gun laws and public safety in America. Tonight, the Supreme Court has delivered a unanimous ruling in Woolford v. Lopez, upholding state authority to confiscate firearms under specific circumstances, namely, domestic violence protection orders and acute mental health crises. The decision comes after months of heated debate and public anxiety, as communities across the country grapple with the realities of gun violence and the limits of personal freedom. This decision doesn't impose a federal mandate, but gives states constitutional backing for targeted gun laws. States now have a clear legal pathway to act decisively when lives are at risk, without fear of overstepping constitutional boundaries. The ruling draws a clearer line between the Second Amendment and the state's duty to protect citizens from imminent harm. It clarifies the balance between individual rights and the collective responsibility to ensure public safety. It addresses legal challenges to new laws in states like Illinois and Nevada, which sought to close deadly loopholes. These states have been at the forefront of legislative efforts to prevent tragedies before they occur. For the first time in years, a deeply divided nation sees a surprising consensus. When a court or medical professional finds someone poses a clear danger, the state can act. This moment marks a rare point of agreement in a long-standing and emotional debate. Victim advocates express relief. Gun rights groups condemn the decision, setting the stage for the next chapter in America's gun debate. The conversation is far from over, and both sides are preparing for what comes next. The court's opinion carefully balances individual liberty with collective security, referencing history and the realities of modern gun violence. The justices acknowledge the complexity of the issue and the need for thoughtful, measured action. This is not just about law, but about how we protect the vulnerable while respecting rights. It's about the choices we make as a society and the values we hold most dear. Tonight, we'll explore what this means for you, your family, and your community. Stay with us as we break down the impact of this historic ruling and what lies ahead for the nation. Disarming those deemed dangerous isn't new. The idea has deep roots in American history and has evolved alongside the nation's changing views on public safety and individual rights. Early American laws often restricted firearm access for those seen as threats to public peace, such as loyalists, enslaved people, or those considered mentally unfit. These measures reflected the anxieties and priorities of their time. These regulations varied widely from colony to colony and state to state, forming the basis for today's historical tradition test in gun law cases, which courts use to evaluate the constitutionality of modern restrictions. Throughout the 20th century, laws evolved in response to rising crime rates and specific threats, like the Gun Control Act of 1968, which barred felons and certain other groups from owning guns. This marked a significant shift in federal involvement. Preemptive confiscation, seizing weapons before a crime, remained controversial and rare until the rise of domestic violence awareness in the 1980s and 90s, when advocates pushed for stronger protections. Modern red flag laws began in Connecticut in 1999, allowing courts to temporarily remove firearms from those deemed in crisis or at risk of harming themselves or others, often based on family or police petitions. Today, 21 states have such laws, each with different standards and procedures, highlighting the lack of national consensus and the ongoing debate over how best to balance safety and rights. Legal challenges over due process and property rights have mounted, leading to the Supreme Court showdown in Woolford v. Lopez, a case that could reshape the legal landscape. The court's decision now forces a national reckoning on how far states can go to prevent tragedy, and what limits, if any, the Constitution places on firearm confiscation in the name of public safety. To understand today's ruling, we need to trace the Supreme Court's evolving approach to the Second Amendment and gun regulation. We look back at key Supreme Court cases that have shaped the national conversation on gun rights and public safety. In 2008, District of Columbia v. Heller affirmed the individual right to possess firearms for self-defense at home, but also made clear that this right is not unlimited, allowing for restrictions on felons and the mentally ill. In 2022, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin expanded gun rights outside the home, but required that any regulation must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. This new test made defending modern gun laws more difficult, as courts now had to search for historical analogs from centuries past, often leading to confusion and inconsistent rulings. In 2024, United States v. Rahimi upheld a law barring those under domestic violence restraining orders from owning guns, emphasizing the principle that the government can disarm individuals found to be dangerous, even as it protects core Second Amendment rights. These landmark cases set the stage for Woolford v. Lopez, the latest chapter in the court's ongoing interpretation of gun rights and public safety. The court's unanimous decision in Woolford builds on Rahimi, confirming that due process, through court hearings or professional evaluations, allows states to temporarily confiscate firearms to prevent imminent violence, as long as the process is fair and evidence-based. This decision solidifies a major piece of the Second Amendment puzzle, clarifying how far states can go to protect the public while respecting constitutional rights. The ruling makes clear that targeted, evidence-based interventions, focused on those who pose a real threat, are constitutionally sound and can withstand legal scrutiny. It marks a turning point in the legal landscape for gun regulation, providing new guidance for lawmakers and courts across the country. The message is clear. States can act decisively when credible threats are identified, as long as they respect due process and individual rights. The Supreme Court's ruling directly responds to bold laws in Illinois and Nevada, states that became testing grounds for aggressive firearm confiscation. In Illinois, Karina's law closed a loophole that allowed abusers to keep guns despite protection orders, mandating police to actively confiscate firearms within 96 hours. Nevada's new law, prompted by a mass shooting, empowers police to confiscate firearms immediately from those placed on mental health crisis holds, even before a court hearing. Both laws shifted from passive compliance to active state intervention in high-risk scenarios. Gun rights groups challenge these measures as violations of due process. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision upholds these active enforcement mechanisms. States now have clear constitutional authority to act when credible threats are identified. This sets a powerful precedent for the nation. The legal landscape for gun confiscation has fundamentally changed. Karina's law in Illinois is a direct response to tragedy. Karina Gonzalez followed every legal step to protect herself, but a loophole allowed her abuser to keep his guns, leading to her death. Outrage over her case led to swift bipartisan action. The new law requires police to confiscate firearms and FOID cards once a warrant is issued, ensuring immediate protection. Supporters say it gives real power to protection orders, focusing on saving lives where a judge has found a credible threat. Opponents argue it tramples due process, allowing property seizure based on civil proceedings, sometimes without the accused present. The Supreme Court's Woolford ruling sides with the need for robust, immediate action to prevent foreseeable tragedy. The law is now a model for targeted intervention. The debate over due process versus public safety continues, but the court has affirmed the state's duty to act. Nevada's stricter law followed a mass shooting by Shane Tamura, who, despite multiple psychiatric holds, legally owned firearms. The tragedy exposed a gap temporary crisis holds didn't trigger gun confiscation. Nevada's new law lets police immediately seize firearms from those placed on mental health crisis holds, without waiting for a court order. Supporters argue it's a necessary step to prevent violence during acute emergencies. Critics say it bypasses due process, citing Supreme Court precedent that limits warrantless seizures. The Woolford decision upholds Nevada's approach, affirming the state's authority to act first in emergencies. The ruling marks a shift. Public safety can justify temporary confiscation based on professional assessment. The debate over rights and safety is far from over, but the legal standard has changed. The Supreme Court's decision has intensified the debate between gun safety advocates and gun rights groups. Supporters see the ruling as a victory for common sense, arguing that targeted confiscation saves lives without broadly infringing on gun rights. They emphasize that these laws apply only after formal legal or medical findings of dangerousness. For them, it's about protecting potential victims like Karina Gonzalez. Gun rights advocates, however, see a dangerous erosion of due process and constitutional freedoms. They argue that property should not be seized based on accusations or preliminary diagnoses. The unanimous ruling alarms them, suggesting broad judicial support for preemptive government action. Both sides vow to continue the fight in legislatures and courts. The national conversation on rights and safety is far from settled. The Woolford decision will reshape American law and politics. Red flag laws and similar statutes now have a stronger constitutional foundation, and more states may adopt or strengthen them. The ruling scrambles partisan lines, with all 9 justices, including conservatives, supporting targeted intervention. This could open the door to bipartisan compromise on gun policy, especially in cases of domestic violence and mental health crises. Socially, the decision may reduce homicides and suicides, but mental health advocates worry it could deter people from seeking help. Implementation will require police training, community outreach, and robust mental health support. The economic burden on law enforcement will be significant, especially in smaller jurisdictions. States must invest in resources to ensure these laws are applied fairly and effectively. The effectiveness of these laws will depend on careful, constitutional implementation. The nation now faces the challenge of turning legal theory into real-world safety. Woolford v. Lopez is a landmark, but not an endpoint. The court affirms that states can act when evidence shows an imminent threat, but only through formal evidence-based processes. The ruling balances rights with the state's duty to protect life, building on decades of legal precedent. The stories of Karina Gonzalez and Shane Tamura's victims are reminders of the stakes. The decision empowers states to close deadly loopholes, but raises serious questions about due process and implementation. Success depends on fair judges, well-trained police, and robust checks and balances. This is a call for critical engagement, not reflexive celebration or condemnation. Citizens must hold officials accountable for fair, effective enforcement. Safety and constitutional rights are intertwined pillars of a free society. Stay informed, stay engaged,